Okay, hi everyone. Here is the long-awaited video that I promised on how I made this coat for my Emmet cosplay. I'm not actually going to be in the video, except for like one hand, but I'll go over the steps I took. So let's get started. For a base, I didn't make it all from scratch, like completely 100%. I used a lab coat, a standard white lab coat like you see in cartoons and movies and all that silly stuff. I used that as a base. I didn't have a pattern or a sewing machine or any knowledge of how to make a coat. So I said, I need something that's coat-shaped to really kick off sewing this. I can't just wing it and say, okay, this is like a coat-shaped piece of a puzzle and put pieces together all for it to not fit right or look wrong or just not work. So I suggest, especially if you're a beginner and don't have patterns or can't find a pattern that you like that's accurate and you'd have to make your own, especially if you don't know how to do that or never done that, I just suggest get a base. A lab coat works great. I went to a store that sold them. Uniform stores usually are where you can get them because they sell scrubs, lab coats, that kind of thing. I'm speaking from the US, so I don't know how it's going to be in other countries, but you can probably look around and find something equivalent. So I got that. I tried it on, sized it, said I wanted slightly longer sleeves, so they covered my hand a little bit so I could use that extra material to anchor the little sleeve cuff things I made. I wanted it to come down to a certain point on my legs, and I wanted, like, I didn't want it, like, super tight fitting. I personally will say it is easier to add fabric to the bottom or to the sleeves than it was to do what I did. I got a lab coat. It was a little too big around the middle. I'm gesturing to myself, and you can't really see it. So I had to take in the armpits. Please excuse the color. I'll get to that shortly. They're a little bit stained. Not from me, from the orange fabric. But yeah, I had to take in the armpits and like elongate, make the sleeves longer basically. So I would suggest sizing to what looks good on your upper half, because that's the only part of the coat you're actually going to keep. The upper half and the sleeves, and a part down the back. Once you do that and you have your lab coat, get fabric. Get fabric that matches, get fabric that's the right color. This fabric is new, not original to the lab coat. This fabric is original to the lab coat. It's a slightly different color, but it's a similar material. I try to get everything similar materials. So yeah, I went out to the fabric store, I got my gray, I got my orange, and I got my white, more white. And I also got my blue for the armband. So what I didn't do next that I should have done was wash this, especially the colors. The gray doesn't really run. It's a like a solid dye job, but this definitely runs. Not when it's wet per se, but like with friction, it runs. As you can, I don't know how well you can see. It's not terrible, but you can kind of see a orangish tint here from where my arms rubbed against the side of my coat. And that would be more avoided if I had washed it first. If I had washed this first, gotten some of that extra dye out. And I mean, now I'm in a conundrum of how to wash the whole coat. I'm getting to that part. Haven't gotten there yet. I am working on that this week, actually, for my next con. So, what I did first, you don't technically have to do it in this order. I traced the line down the middle in the back. This big panel on the back, this big white track looking part, is a mostly original coat, except for this little addition on the end here, because I wanted to make it longer than the coat was. I traced this out, I measured, and made lines down. If you want to make it like washable, Silver Sharpie works great because it washes out completely. It doesn't leave any residue behind because it is basically a clear liquid with tiny little bits of sparkles in it. So the sparkles wash off, leaving only possibly clear liquid behind. It doesn't show. It's a good fabric tip, especially because you're working on white. You can't use typical fabric chalk like you could with a darker fabric, if you're doing Ingo. There are black lab coats, by the way. If you look online, you can find black lab coats and do this same process for an Ingo cosplay. So yeah, I traced this out first. So once I got to the stripes, I would have something to go off of how far back I wanted them to go, and wouldn't have to be stitching things up in a weird way. And also, it gave me a great landmark for the collar. Now, the collar was the hardest part. I'm going to flip us back over here, because the back isn't super important at the moment. I'm doing this one-handed, so please bear with me. But yeah, the collar was difficult. I had to unfold it myself mentally. I couldn't use a 3D model or anything like that. So this is what it looks like unfolded. The line down the middle is because I didn't make it big enough at first. I had to add more fabric. That's not anything you'll have to do if you do it right the first time. So the shape is basically the shape I did originally. It's basically this top one. Visually looking at the Pokemon Masters models, looking at concept art, and honestly a lot of fan art. They do a great job with it. It is a shape kind of like this. This is not to scale. Don't use this exactly as a pattern. It's like some weird trapezoid with a rectangle on top. Now, when I first cut it, it still doesn't lie perfect on my coat. It crunches up a little bit, and that is because when you make it, you want to curve it like this. So it fits sort of like over your shoulders more snugly. You just want to curve the bottom. I did curve some of like the internal components in mine. But yeah, you're gonna want to cut out the fabric more like this with like a curve on the bottom. So, making the collar, it is 2 layers of white fabric, and in the like this sort of triangular portion and like to here, to where I sort of want to bend it, and a little bit up here, and all of this part is interfacing. Interfacing is a stiff sort of felt-like fabric that you can use to make things hold a shape, per se. Some people who want to make like a really stiff, accurate coat might put it in like the whole thing to make it sort of flare out and stay like that, like they show in like the concept art in the anime. It's kind of traffic cone looking. I wanted to go for a more realistic look, so I just have interfacing in this portion. It helps the collar stand up. And the top part doesn't have interfacing in it to give it more flop, so it will always stay sort of downward. This isn't a very good, obviously, look at it, because it's not on a body, but it stands up, and this part in the back sort of flops over, just like in the concept art and the official art. Also say hi to Third Rail. He wanted to be in the video, so he's here. So after I got this part done, I put this the gray trim, on until this point here, until the collar met the original coat. And I also pulled things off the original coat. There was an original lab coat collar that I seam ripped off. You're going to want a seam ripper. I wasted my time seam ripping off pockets, but it didn't really matter because I replaced all that fabric. So I wouldn't do that. That was a total waste of time. But yeah, so I removed things and edited a little bit. So at that point, had a collar on a lab coat. What came next? The stripes. The stripes were the most important part. And what I did was I measured. These stripes are almost exactly 6 inches in width. That's the one. And I went piece by piece. When I wanted to add this section of stripe with the seam here, this portion here, when I wanted to add this, I just took the lab coat with a little bit of allowance, so I cut like about here, so I'd have something to sew to. I cut out this section here. I didn't leave any allowance here because the part on the back was going to be cut off too. But, and I left a lot of overhang on the orange portion because I needed to add this later. So I just had this panel here, and I just sewed it on. And then I just attached, I lined it up with the armpit here and attached it to this next piece and sewed it on the back, same way. I went piece by piece, so I could have something to go off of, a reference. How long was the coat originally? How, like, what kind of shape of pieces am I going to want? Something to hold it all together so it wasn't just, like, sleeves with some stripes dangling off of it. And I wanted to do it piece by piece because it just made more sense that way. Every time I tried it on, there was just, like, torn chunks of coat hanging off. It looked more like it was Emmet who got hit by a train than Emmet in his normal coat, which was kind of funny. So yeah, I just did that all the way down, front and back. At this point, I think, yeah, it was this point, yeah. I made the coat come out a little bit and then went back to going down to give it that sort of, like, flare. I don't really know where it is on their body, like somewhere between their ribs and their hips. It's a little bit high. I made it a little lower on myself, but not quite, not too much. So I just added all of those. I can show a little bit inside. I left openings here just in case any seams need to be repaired ever, but I'm not left-handed, even though I am cosplaying a left-handed guy. I am very much not. But yeah, you can see sort of the seams. They were sewn multiple times because of the fact that I added a lining, which I'll get to shortly. But yeah, they're kind of frayed, like, not frayed, but, like, it's fabric. It's raw edges of fabric. It's going to look like that, which is why I have this lining that covers it. But I have these open pockets in the back in case anything on the front rips. Like, oh no, now there's a hole between the white and the orange here. How am I going to fix it? It's all sewn up on the other side. So now I can just, like, invert it and fix any pop seams that I need to. And no one's going to see this, like, these, like, little snaggy bits in the back because that's where my body is. It's covering it. So all of the edges that you can see are, like, finished. So I've sewed on the stripes. I needed to take in the armpits. This might be a better look. I needed to take in the armpits a couple inches because they were too baggy on me, and it made it look not very good. It just made it look like I was kind of, like, refrigerator shaped, very boxy. So I took them in a little bit. Would not recommend that. Would recommend fitting the lab coat to your armpits because that is so much harder to fix than adding extra fabric to the bottom or to the end of the sleeves. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 was wash your fabric first so you don't end up in my conundrum. And tip number 3, I guess, is make the collar a slightly curved shape to get that proper, not crumply look, but the crumply look is fine too. You can't really tell. Then, after the stripes, I made the lining. It is just the same white fabric sewn over top of the raw backside of all the other ones. So I started from the bottom, and I sewed a very neat line onto the orange stripe on the bottom. I used orange thread, used the thread that will show on the front side, not the color that will show on the back side, because this on the back looks a lot better than little white tracks along the bottom of this would look. Oh, and for thread, I do recommend upholstery thread. If you're hand sewing things like I had to, upholstery thread is very, very, very strong, and it is not going to rip on you and cause issues. If one of these threads tears, I would need to resew, like, probably most of this thing just to get it to not unravel over time on me. So I used really tough thread. Will recommend that if you are hand sewing any part of this, use upholstery thread. So I did that. I made this edge not so frayed like this, so I tucked it in. And then I went up stripe by stripe and added these panels. I would not recommend sewing one big, long swath of white fabric on the inside, because then that will restrict how this sort of fills out. If that makes any sense. It will be taut up at the top because the weight of all of that white fabric will be on that one seam, and it will, like, pull it up here and make it look tight here, and then kind of baggy on the outside down here because there'll be nothing anchoring it to itself. Because this does give your coat a lot more weight. This increases the weight. It makes it feel more real, honestly. But it also makes it a little hotter. But it increases the weight, and this panel method distributes the weight better, so it's not going to look tight at the bottom and saggy on the tight at the top and saggy in the bottom. Finishing up the top one was tricky. I needed to like sew kind of blindly, stuck my fingers a few times, but I got it. It's a nice, clean, folded over edge. Measuring is tricky sometimes, so I have a few spots where the measurements are slightly off. But overall, the lining was really hard. It was probably the hardest part, but it came out good. So what I did was I would take a panel. This part would be flipped down. It would be upside down. I would sew it to this, like I wouldn't have to like blindly sew. It would be flipped so that the raw edges would be just pulled together. And then I would flip this up and sew the raw edge of this part to this part, to the seam here. And it would be attached. And then I would do the same thing with this. This would be flipped down. I would sew it here, and it would just kind of fold up and cover the crappy little raw edge parts. And I always gave some extra fabric here where it sort of bumped out because it needed it to not crinkle the other side. So yeah, that was the lining. Left the pockets open in the back. I could have sewn it to this, but again, especially if you're hand sewing, I don't recommend that. Please don't do that. It was insane. I recommend leaving this open so you have access to all of your little problem spots that could pop up. You don't want to have to seam rip this out over and over because it will make your fabric look bad and it'll eventually wear on it. So I did that. So the stripes and the lining were done. And so was the collar. So next what did I do next? I think I jumped around a little bit because I got tired of just sewing long strips, because these were just a lot of long strips of sewing over and over and over. Same with the lining. So I took a break from these and like the track parts on the back, the gray lines down the back, and I made the sleeves. The sleeves I measured these stripes, made them all equal. There's two of each color, 2 white, 2 orange. And then I just folded over a little bit of gray fabric and left a big, about this much of it with like a raw edge up here. Not actually like here, but like an amount of fabric like this much of the gray, and then the part at the top was the raw edge. I did that on both sides, and to attach them, it was a little bit complicated. I can sort of invert it. Should have done this with one. I had both of my hands. I don't want to like put down my phone and have it be staring at anything. So you can see on the inside here, it's a little bit off. It crunched up the sleeve a little bit, but you don't see this, so the crunch is not very obvious. When I'm wearing it, you really can't tell. You can kind of see my fingers moving in here. This edge, you can see it in the light, especially. This edge is not a raw edge. I folded it over, so these threads go through 2 layers of gray fabric. And I just sewed it on the inside here. It gave the illusion of the whole inside of the sleeve being gray instead of white. And it kind of gave it a more unifying look and look of sort of depth, I guess. I just kind of sewed it on there hastily. I was getting tired of sewing when I did this. So that was sewn on there. When you put it on, your fingers might catch a little bit. Just be careful. And then on the other side of the sleeve, the actual white sleeve part, the end of the white sleeve goes till about here. And I just very carefully, I lifted the inner portion of the sleeve, like the actual stripes and colors, off the backing and sort of held it like this and sort of stitched it together like that. And that's why I wanted the extra sleeve. I wanted this anchor point for my cuffs instead, so I didn't have to like make them only attached on one side or like stitched on in a really weird way. So I did it like this, and you can see all my little bits and bobs. And since this part doesn't really experience much wear at all, I just left this a raw edge because it folds over and no one can tell it's there. So I am going to have to sit this down for a moment. We'll keep talking. And then I just inverted the sleeves, made sure they looked roughly even, on the edges. And there's a sleeve. It's also nice and, like, weighty, so it kind of feels, like I said, I tried to make it feel kind of real. I did that on both sides. I made the armband that's just a loop of fabric that I cleaned the edges of. I also made little, like, cross tie almost things, because this is only pinned on. I didn't want to, like, attach it to the coat for washing purposes, and just because I wanted it to be, like, a separate piece. So it's, like, safety pinned on in, like, a couple locations. So I made these little, like, cross bridge pieces so the safety pins weren't visible. So there's that. And at that point, I was almost done. I added the buttons. These buttons are wooden, painted with acrylic paint. Made a shade to match this. I kind of wanted to make them metallic, but I didn't think of it at the time. And I just sewed them on. I sealed them with a matte sealant. I seal everything I paint because I don't want it rubbing off on anything. Paint is really good at rubbing off on things. So yeah, then I sewed these on the front. They're just a couple of quadruple folded bits of the gray fabric. You're going to want to get gray fabric in a length that allows you to sew it all in one go and not have to do it in piecemeal, because piecemeal doesn't look very good. Or it wouldn't look very good. I luckily asked for, like, oh, can you get me this meterage long ways? So it's like a nice long bunch. So I did that. But yeah, this is the edges of both the backing and the front stripes are sewn in here, which gives them some extra strength. If you, like, squeeze this, you can kind of feel some bits that are bunched up, but it doesn't really matter because it's all hidden. No one's going to come up and, like, tug on my coat weirdly, or if they do, I'm not really going to be happy. So, and then I connected it here. The connection's not perfect because they got measured differently. So, yeah, and then I finished it off on the bottom with, to try and keep any raw edges from showing. It's just a little fold over, and tucking things in. I did that on both sides, and I did the stripes down the back, too. They had an added advantage of anchoring the stripes, actually, to the backing extra, because you can kind of see. This is gray thread, actually. This is anchoring one side of the railroad tracks, sort of rail portion on the back. And this is anchoring the other side of it. You can see right here. So it's like a bit of glue that's holding this orange to this white, aside from just this seam that is holding them together right here. That is the one thing about this coat that was quite good in this piecemeal, completely experimental way that I made it, was the way I made it led to a lot of seams being sewn twice or 3 times, which has made it quite durable. It's not like a delicate thing. It's quite strong. It's just hand sewn, so it doesn't look super great, and I had to do things multiple times, which in actuality was really difficult. It took a month and a half to make, and that was, on one side, I have a full-time job, but on the other side, I was working on this a good portion of the days, at least a little bit. That was an amount of time enough to make it without stress, without stressing if it was going to be done. That's for me, though. I was basically forfeiting my drawing and my writing to work on this as my, like, sole creative project for a month and a half. Some people might not want to do that, so plan in advance. Yeah, this is how I made my coat. I hope this is comprehensive enough. If you want work in progress pictures, message me on Twitter at Blue Jedi Force, which will be in the description, or you can message me on Tumblr, send me an ask at ingo-ingoing-ingon. That's where I post all my cosplay pictures there. And you can message me in either of those places. They'll be in the description, like I said. And ask any questions. Ask about work in progress pictures. Ask questions. Ask anything you want. I will be happy to answer and happy to help anyone sort of learn how to make this coat, because I don't know how to sew. I don't know how to make clothes, but I still made this coat and it came out pretty great. I think if improve upon it if I ever did it again, which I really don't want to have to do because it was hard. So I think all in all, it really worked. So if you have no sewing skills, if you've never picked up a sewing needle before, if you have the sort of motivation to make this, you can do it. You can definitely do it. Just remember a few things about reinforcing stitches. Just Google some basic stitches and use that and run from there. And you'll have a Ship of Theseus Frankenstein coat that will look great and work great for a cosplay. So I hope this helped whoever wants to make a coat and doesn't know where to start. So yeah, message me if you have any questions. Till next time, more cons coming up. Hopefully more videos and more footage and pictures. So see you next time.